Thank you, Kim. Something that I learned a short while after becoming a husband is the never-increasing, never-ending honey-do list. How many of you have one of those? I remember the first time that me and Ashley were talking about having one of those and how it was great. It was fantastic for our old farmhouse. We had a lot of projects to do. It was kind of a rundown home that needed quite a bit of work to become more than just a house. It was a house, and Ashley wanted it to be a home. And I remember a few of the things on that list. Number 1, fix the bathroom stairs. Number 2, fix the upstairs bathroom tub so it's usable. Number 3, fix the leaky faucets in the house. There were 5 of them. Make an outside spigot for watering plants around the house. Fix the ceiling in the dining room. Organize the shed. Paint the electrical box. Make a garden. And I think that was it. At least for the big things. And each and every single one of those projects was not easy. I never ended up fixing the ceiling in the dining room or making a garden because a lot of things happened. We were married, and then we had 2 kids. And so there was a nursery to build and so many other honeydew projects. The list continued to expand and change even when a big project got done. Even moving now to a beautiful new house that we love and a new city, a new state, I still have a honeydew list. It may not be as hard or as difficult, but there's still things that need to be done that I do. You may feel like you dislike having a honeydew list. I know I did for a little while. Why do I have to do this? I was living in this house just fine without a list of new things that needed to be fixed. But I did learn how it's useful and helpful, not only to make my house better, but how to make my wife happier. It helped me to love her better, to make our lives better together without me having to think too hard about it. I know that when I do things on my honeydew list, that it's something that brings my wife great joy. So I do the things on the list with a smile most of the time, knowing that it makes her happy because I love her. And seeing her happy makes me happy. And when I think about our relationship with the Lord and how He has so many things for us to do, I think of it at times like a honeydew list. He loves us. He loves all of us. And He wants us to do some things so that we can show our love to Him. It brings Him great joy when we do these things for Him. So if we love the Lord, we'll do so many of the things that He has for us. The things on the honeydew list from the Lord are numerous, but the things on the list on the screen are just a few of the things that Jesus has told us to do. The things that the Lord has told us to do that you bring Him great pleasure. And many of them you may already do. You may already do them well. But I want to encourage and remind you through this series of some of the instructions that the Lord has given to us. And last week we talked about the first thing that we have to do. The first thing that we have to do is put our faith in Jesus and become a part of His church, become His bride, open up our hearts to Him. And that's so important because before you can do what Jesus has for you to do, you have to believe in Him and be in a relationship with Him. And then out of your faith in Jesus, then you can act. Once we have faith, then we can act. It's what we just read in James 2:26. As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. And this is a core guiding principle of our church. Our mission statement as a church is that Zion Church of Wauseon is here to make disciples of Jesus Christ by sharing the good news in word and deed, so our church family can share God's love, mercy, and grace. That's what we're all about. In word and deed, we share the good news. In our deeds, we show that our faith is not dead, and we do this to make disciples of Jesus. We are a church that has 4 values, and one of them is that we are compassionate. We are compassionate towards others, just like the Lord has compassion on us. We have compassion on others, and we share God's love, mercy, and grace to everyone that we can. There are many different ways that we can show compassion to others, but a great way comes from one of Jesus' instructions that we read a similar account earlier in Luke. We read now in Matthew 22, Jesus' encounter with a Pharisee. The Bible says, hearing that Jesus had silenced the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commands. We talked about the first commandment last week in a roundabout way, and today we're talking about the second: loving your neighbor as yourself. And when we think about neighbors, the first thing that likely comes to your mind is the people who are your literal neighbors, the people who live around you. We all have neighbors. Some of them are nearby, some of them are a little bit further, but we have neighbors. Even when you live in the country, you still have neighbors. And this was true in Bible times as well. But after being given this straightforward instruction, the teacher of the law wanted to justify himself, and so he asked Jesus, who's my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And Jesus tells the great parable of the Good Samaritan, in which he shows that we talked about with the kids, that everyone is your neighbor, even your enemies are your neighbors. We should love everyone because of that. And when we think about neighbors in that parable, we can understand it. We love the idea of everyone being our neighbor. We can think about ourselves and say, I'm doing a really bang-up job loving everybody. I'm doing a really good job. I'm being a good neighbor all the time. I'm truly loving my neighbors. And this is a great teaching. It's an important aspect of loving our neighbors. But what I want to challenge you with today is not loving everyone, but loving a few. When we love everyone, we end up with a lot of metaphoric love for metaphoric neighbors. And metaphorically, we are killing it, guys. We are just doing a really good job of loving everyone. But in reality, the people who live across the street, down the road, our literal neighbors are people who sometimes we don't even know their names. While Jesus did give us instruction to love everyone, so often we overlook our literal neighbors and try to love those who are far off first. I believe that when Jesus gave us this instruction, we can think of it as reaching Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. Jesus tells us to love our neighbors and to love everyone. He wants us to reach the end of the earth. But first, we need to love those who are right next to us. Reach your literal neighbors before you reach your metaphoric neighbors. And once we learn to love our literal neighbors, then we can love a little bit further out and further out. And until we know the people and love the people who are in close proximity to us, we won't nearly be as effective as loving those who are far off, as if we did know them. You can live beside someone for years and not hardly know anything about them. Jesus is challenging us to love our neighbors, and as we love them, we learn to love others, to learn to love more people. There's great power in drawing a circle around where you live and working your way out from your literal home to reach others. Now, growing up in rural Illinois, a neighbor to me is somebody whose square mile was touching mine. It wasn't somebody who was within a mile of me. It was, if they touched my square mile, they were my neighbor. We had 12 neighbors that their square mile touched mine. And I remember getting to know our neighbors growing up, but I didn't know them all. My dad would tell me, oh, the Garrigs are our neighbors. Which house is the Garrigs? Oh, they're on the corner. We drive by their house whenever we go to Grandma's. I'm like, I've never met them in my life. For you, you probably don't think that people who touch your square mile are your neighbors. You know how far you judge someone to be your neighbor. If you're in town, it's probably a block or two. Around here, if someone's a half mile or a mile away, they're your neighbor. There's a lot more houses than where I grew up. But I want to show you a map quickly of where we as a church live. This is what the directory says where we live. That's Northwest Ohio. I don't know if you can see it very well, but we got people up here in Sylvania. We got people over here in Archbold. We got people up here in Morenci, and we got some people over here, which is about where we are. We got people all over the place. Think about where you live. Where is your neighbors? For me, I know where they are. We've got people living all over the place. And I know there are gaps in the map, and I'm not worried about that right now. What I'm worried about is who are the people who are literally right next to you. These areas around us are important. If you don't know your neighbors or don't know them very well, like I asked the kids, what are their names? A great way to get to know and begin to love your neighbors is to learn, retain, and use their names. I remember we got a new neighbor back in Illinois. I had my own house, and somebody moved in down the road. And I met them. And I didn't remember their name. I met them again, and I did not remember their name. 5 times I met them. And the 5th time, I was painting the mailbox with Ashley, doing the honey-do list. And him and his wife stopped. And he introduced himself to Ashley. Oh, I'm Dave. Oh, the Lord has provided. Hello, Dave. It's good to see you, Dave. It's great. Thanks for stopping, Dave. I finally remembered his name. I'm not very good at this, but it's so practical. It's so hard to care for somebody until you know what their name is. Until I could say, hi, Dave. Look at what Dave's doing. They're tearing down their barn. I wonder how Dave's doing. I still don't remember his wife to this day. But it's a start. But I learned really the importance of learning people's names from that encounter. I learned from that. And so now we move here, and it's so important. We're the new people in town. Who do we know? Not just all of you people. That's a challenge in itself. We're working on it. I think we're almost there. But there are people who are our literal neighbors, who we got to get to know. I don't want to know them as people who drive certain cars, who work at certain places, and who have other vague things around them. I know what the vet next door looks like, but I don't know her name. I don't know any of the other people's names who work there. But there is a way to start. We got to learn the names of our neighbors so that we can learn to love them. And after we get to know our neighbors and learn their names and begin to use them, by God's grace, they'll come to mind. I know as I'm praying, there are times when I think of, oh, how can I pray for my neighbor? How's the Lord directing me to pray for them? And it's a natural progression that starts to happen when we know them. When we actually know them, we can begin to love them. And a great example of this is what Ashley's doing. She's good at this. She's better at this than I am. And it's not because she's a stay-at-home mom. It's because she is better with people. She's better with people and loving them well. We've developed a relationship with a girl who I'm going to call Morgan, who I'm going to call Hannah. It goes from the start. We had cookies. We went and met our neighbors. It started with, hi, neighbor, have some cookies. It's really nice to meet you, too. Hey, Hannah. How's it going? Hey, Hannah, do you want to come over and watch our kids together? Do you want to talk? And they sit around what we call our outside living room, the couches that we have on our patio furniture outside, and talking about their dreams and passions, what they want to do in the future, how their family's doing. That relationship has grown over the last year or so, but it wouldn't have ever started if we'd never gone there and learned her name. Learned the name of her and her husband and her kids. So we could start to loving them. And many of you are not the new people in town. I don't know how many of you have moved ever or recently at all, but you probably know vaguely your neighbors. But I can only imagine how awkward it might be to go and reintroduce yourself to someone you've lived by for a very long time. But if we want to take Jesus' command seriously, then we are instructed to learn the names of the people that we should have known their names 20 years ago. To get to know what they do, where they are in their life, and to love them regardless of how they treat us. And a great tool that I've learned of remembering the names of the people who live around you is to take a blank piece of paper, just like this one, and draw a map. Where do I live? And now who are my neighbors? We got a grid around here. It's nice and easy. If you could draw a straight line, you can draw your neighborhood. Well, most of them. There are a couple crooked roads. Draw your area, draw your neighborhood, and write in the names of those families that live by you. If you don't know them off the top of your head, then I want to challenge you to go and meet them. Go and learn their names, the names of their children if they live there, and write them down, and to begin to use them and consider them. And not only that, but do you know another way that you can learn to love your neighbors better? What's your next step? If you know their names, what is your next step to care for them? How can you love your neighbors better? And you may be wondering, Eli, why in the world are you telling me to love my neighbors? Why am I learning the names of my neighbors? Why am I learning to love them better? How's it going to help me? How's it going to help them? How's it going to save their soul? That's why we're in church, after all. I want to save everyone. Well, I want to remind you of what Jesus said in the parable of the Good Samaritan. A Samaritan, as he traveled, helped a man who was beaten by robbers. He saw him, he took pity on him, he went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured on oil. He took the man to an inn on his own donkey, paid for his expenses, loved him. This story tells us what it looks like to be a good neighbor. But did the Samaritan ever once talk to the man about religion? Did the man on the floor need to hear about what he believed, or did he need to be helped, be loved? He was never told about the Samaritan's religion. He was told and shown love first. Jesus is telling us that in order to be good neighbors, we don't need to evangelize them first. We need to love them first. And I remember the importance of learning about how to do cold call evangelism, door-to-door evangelism. But it reminds me of old school traveling salesmen who would go and they would sell stuff. They would come and knock on your door and sell stuff to you. How many of you remember that? It was a great thing. But instead of selling things, we're selling Jesus. If you were working as a traveling salesman and you wanted to be in a relationship with your neighbor, you probably wouldn't go to their house, knock on the door, and make a cold call sale. Oh, I live just down the street. Will you buy my product? If you were to do that, then your neighbors probably wouldn't want to be in a relationship with you at all, because they would assume that you see them only as customers, only as people who will take your product rather than a real live person. And what is so unfortunate is that in this world, in this time and age, in our culture, is a lot of people feel like Christians are traveling salesmen who only care about selling Jesus. That's how they feel when they interact with people who follow Jesus, when they interact with Christians. They feel like the only reason we, as the church, want to be friends with them, the only reason we want to have a relationship with them, the only reason we won't do anything nice to them or for them is because we're going for the sale. We have to know, will you follow Jesus? Because our friendship and our relationship doesn't matter in and of itself. It's only really if we get to speak about Jesus, get him to sign on the dotted line and buy my product, so to speak. Often we've all been raised in environments that tell us that we become friends with people so that at some point we do something to them, something Christian, something about God, and it probably doesn't come in a very natural or caring and loving way, but we do it so that we can get them saved. So often we don't learn about the importance of being in a relationship and loving people first, without an agenda. Just loving our people just as they are. I'm not asking you to go and evangelize. That's not what Jesus is telling us to do. What God wants us to do is show love. What God did for us is he became a man. He incarnated himself and he demonstrated his love for us by becoming like us. We see in the life and personhood of Jesus Christ that he walked among us and he loved people. He reached all the way to us by becoming like us and connecting with us. He loved his people. His disciples, the 12, he loved them. Yes, later he saved them, but before he just loved them and walked with them, spent time with them, and cared for them, cared for their families, healed Peter's mother-in-law, actually. He loved his people. It wasn't enough to have the right things to say. It doesn't matter if you have true things to say, it matters the posture in which you say them. How you demonstrate love in the way that you are and the way that you talk. People don't care what you have to say until they know that you care. We're not talking to people and getting to know our neighbors so we can convert them. That's not our priority. I mean, eventually, yes, that is the ultimate goal, that we want everyone to be saved. But we don't do that as the start. They get there, it's amazing. But we don't love people just to convert them. We love people because we've been converted. We love people because God has gripped our hearts in such a way that we're loved. And we want to overflow that love and engage with those around us. As we get to know our neighbors, I'll tell you, if you do something weird, if they feel like you're just trying to evangelize, they're going to cut ties with you because they may not want that. They may not want to receive that yet. But every single person is looking to see if anyone out there really loves me. Just as I am, if somebody really cares about me. In this culture of disconnect and social distancing, is there anybody out there who actually cares for me? Who loves me? When we try and sell Jesus, it can get really weird really quickly. People don't like it, and frankly, very few people end up giving their lives to Jesus. But when we love people right where they're at, and we love people from the core of who we are, people come to know Jesus all over the place because they saw his love in you, and they want to know, how can I have that love too? Where did it come from? Why are you so loving? I'm loving because I'm loved by Jesus. And hopefully that's the way that we talk about the life that we have with him. That kind of life it's compelling. And it draws people into a life and into salvation that they never knew was possible. Over the next few weeks and months, I want to challenge you all. Can you get to know your literal neighbors? Draw a little map and see, do you know their names? And do you love them? How are you loving them? Your job is to love them, not to save them. That's God's job. Show them love. Learn their names. Learn what they do. Care for them and love them. That's what Jesus told us to do. Can you do that? I know it's going to be a challenge for me too, to get to know the people I don't know. Even though I've met some of them, I don't remember all their names. What about you? By God's grace, we'll do it together. To close our service today, we'll take communion together. We take communion to remember what Jesus did, that he became a man for us. He loved us, and he was the greatest example to all of us of how to have compassion. How to have compassion on us and on others. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 11, verses 23 to 28, "For I received from the Lord what I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus on the night when he was betrayed took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way also he took the cup after supper, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes.'" Today, as we take communion together, I want you to take a little bit of time to pray for your neighbors. If you know their names, write them down in your bulletin. Write them down and remember these people and pray for them. And continue to pray for them this week and beyond. If the ushers would please come forward, we'll pass the bread. Please wait until everyone has their elements, and we will take the bread together.